Survivor of trafficking, Sean Wheeler speaks out to help people understand that boys are trafficked too. He seeks to break the myths about the impacts of trafficking on boys and men who are survivors. Boys have fewer resources available to deal with the impacts resulting from all types of abuse. Sean asks this question: how is the rape of any child okay?
Have you ever felt like giving up, quitting, throwing in the towel? Welcome to Never Ever Give Up Hope featuring Carol Graham. She's an author, health coach, and motivational speaker. Backed into a corner multiple times in her life, Carol shares with you stories on how she overcame some of the toughest obstacles a person can go through in life, but refused to give up hope. Rather than admit defeat, an opportunity was presented, and it involves each and every one of you. Carol will feature spectacular guests who will share their messages of hope, encouragement, and their inspiration to prove why life's adversities only make you stronger. And now, welcoming the host of the show, here's Carol Graham.
Before 5 years of age, predators came into Sean Wheeler's life who used him for sexual purposes until he was 9 years old. By age 7, Sean was used in child pornography along with another boy, a girl, and several adults. By the age of 9, he was drinking, smoking, and addicted to pornography. When his family eventually moved away from that small Midwestern town they were living in, the damage was already done. But God rescued him. Today, Sean Wheeler is here to share his incredible story. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Well, I look forward to it. What you are going to share is not just your story, but what we as a society can do to help and also to become aware. And so we have a lot of ground to cover, and I thank you. My first question to you, and I think one of the biggest questions my audience would ask, is how in the world does this happen? So you can answer that from both your story and also possibly what parents and all of us as concerned individuals need to know.
It happens in a variety of ways. For me, it began very young. The grooming started when I was even before I entered preschool. Around the age of 5, between 5 and 6, there was a network where we lived that was aware of me, that the grooming had begun, and they had
Oh
instructed,
my word.
yeah, and instructed a couple of their older teenage boy members to sort of ramp it up a notch. And so they eventually got me away. The one got me into a shed where he sexually assaulted me, and then he hit me or he threatened to kill my dog and hurt the family. Nobody's going to want you.
Mm-hmm.
All that stuff. So you hear that, and so you know he introduced me more graphically to sexual abuse in that moment, and it just took off from there. Later, he would introduce me to some other friends his age. Then eventually, adults came into the picture, men and women. I would be taken to various locations and abused and then returned. And so it's not always a case where people are stolen away. And I've heard of it more with teenagers, middle school and high school types. They get picked up, they get used, they get returned home, and they just keep quiet about it. In my case, it was a small town that we grew up in, and back in that day, it was not uncommon for little kids to go outside and play. You go out after breakfast and you'd come home after lunch, or at lunch, you'd go out after lunch and come home at dinner. And, it was in those time frames that people would find me and take me off and do their thing and then bring me back. And there was always threats. There were other times when I definitely got hit and threatened, with even worse, being killed. About age 7, I was taken to a house in the country, and that's where they call it. They don't call it child pornography anymore. I don't really care what name they use. The current term is CSAM, child sexual abuse material. But that's the house in which they produced took the pictures. I had my voice sort of taken away because I would protest early on when they started doing that. And then they finally beat me into silence. So I lost my voice. That day, I lost my image because in that house, there was, as you mentioned, another boy, a girl, and 3 adults, 2 men and 1 woman. The sound of that camera just bothered me. For years, I hated having my picture taken because I honestly didn't think it belonged to me anymore. And then other things continued after that time till we finally moved away from that town. By that point, as you mentioned, I knew how to smoke, I knew how to drink. I'd certainly seen enough pornography, adult and child pornography, and it all of that seemed normal to me at the time. I should probably change my terminology because I don't know that I was addicted. I just think for me, in my situation, for a lot of kids like that's just your normal. And, obviously at 7, 8, 9, 10, you don't have the ability to know that that is definitely not normal. As I grew into a teenager, as with a lot of kids who are abused, became just very promiscuous. And if people would hit on me, I just assumed that's what they got to do. My counselors have told me you weren't old enough to realize you had a choice because I didn't think so. Early on, the people who abused me told me around 8 or 9 that, by the time you turn 19 or 20, you should probably just die because you won't be worth anything anymore. So I approached my 20th birthday with great apprehension, got through it. And at that point, I just sort of decided no one's ever going to do this to me again against my will. And I was for a long time just an angry young man, an adult, and didn't trust anybody very well just because when you grow up that way, you just don't. You develop an image of yourself that people get to use you and they're just going to hurt you. And so then when I became big enough to fight back, it's like, yeah, okay. But, that was a situation. Now, how I got into that early on, predators have the ability to spot children who are vulnerable. I have an extremely outgoing personality. I've done personality tests. They say you're one who tends to be a peacemaker and you're an extrovert and someone who likes to please. And so they used all those things against me. In our home, there was a lot of dysfunctionality, beaten on, and I got told early on that I was not supposed to be born. One of my grandparents was, you almost killed your mother when you were born. I heard that many times, which obviously isn't the child's choice. I became very vulnerable, and I tell people, I just wanted to feel loved. I realize now I was loved at home, but they twisted the meaning of that word, and convinced me that was love if I let them do those things. And then later on, as a teenager, I decided it was fake love. But I told myself, well, fake is better than nothing. And then as a young adult, I said, well, no, it isn't. So I'll just be me. That's where I was. So that's how it all took off.
Okay, I do have a few questions. The first one is you made a statement that I found very interesting about the vulnerable children. I always assumed that they would be the introverts, and you are saying no, that's the extroverts. Why?
Well, I think the introverts are probably more vulnerable at home, and this is just a guess because I'm not a psychologist. I mean, the extroverts are vulnerable because even though I've been told not to get into cars, people would lie and say, well, we know your parents and you can come with us. Well, I believe that. And I liked meeting new people and talking to people and stuff. And so, that made me accessible. My brother is much more quiet and low key and introverted than I am. And he was never susceptible to that because somebody asked him to get in the car, as a preteen. He would have been like, no, and ran away.
Interesting. Now, you did mention that your parents and your home life was dysfunctional, but this is not necessarily the only scenario. These people, these predators, can certainly prey on people or kids who come from a good, solid home as well, correct?
Yes, I believe that's true.
Okay. Now, the next question is one regarding fear. My guess is you lived in a state of fear. How long did it take, in other words, for you to come out from under that? Was it not until you were 20 years old and said, enough already? Or did you not feel that fear because you were squelching it?
That was a constant state really until I got counseling. Yeah, it was always there, but I learned to sort of just be aware of it. And I figured, I guess, it's like, okay, this is my own self telling me danger or something, even if there wasn't. There was always a fear of people finding out because I thought, if people knew what had been done to me, they would be so creeped out by that they wouldn't want me around. I'll tell you another thing too. When I was little, I got hurt one time because I was 9 and the person had been promised a 7-year-old. And as a teenager, somebody thought I was 13 and I was 15 and they were trying to, hit on me and physically did hit me because it's like, yeah, you're too old. And so I learned to lie about my age, figure out what people
Hmm.
thought, because I've always looked much younger than physically than I am. So I figured, okay, I'll just figure out what age they think I am and pretend to be that. And that's the safe way to be. So I didn't, for many years, even celebrate my birthday simply because to me it was like, why celebrate my being born? There's no reason. So, yeah, the fear was always there, something you work through in counseling.
One of the things that you mentioned was that you lost your identity, which is normal. Is this sometimes where children, because of whatever type of abuse they may be going through, that they assume another identity or a special friend? What can you share about that?
Well, I can tell you that it's my understanding that dissociative identity disorder is more prevalent in probably children below the age of 10. And if they're in an extremely traumatic situation, they learn to dissociate, and I did. I do deal with that. I realized later through the counseling process that depending on the situation, the one responding might be the 10-year-old me, the 19-year-old me, the 30-year-old me, or whatever. There's a really good movie I like about Charles Dickens called The Man Who Invented Christmas. And in that movie, his wife says to him, sometimes I don't know which you I'm talking to. And my wife,
Mm,
she felt the same way. I learned later that Dickens had grown up in a traumatic situation, probably had DID as
really? Huh.
yeah, he a lot of his characters. That's a great movie, that The Man Who Invented Christmas, because it gives you the backstory of A Christmas Carol. So I worked through a lot of that in counseling. Now certain things can still bring up the angry me at 19 or 20, or the mischievous 10 or 11-year-old. But I know when that side is out, and it's like, okay, then you balance it out with your rational adult self so you can learn to deal with it. It creeped me out the first time I learned that I had that, because I thought, oh, great, something else is wrong because I'm like Sybil, with 100 personalities. My counselor pointed out, yes, that's true of some people, but that's not your situation. You don't have 100 different yous inside who don't know each other. You're fully aware of all of the different facets. So you learn to deal with it. I have an amazing wife and she deals with it too, and she's incredible. So, but yeah, dissociation is a way that it takes a child away from a traumatic situation. When I was used in the pornography and people were doing pretty horrific things, I just went away. I remember that.
Mm,
And
hmm.
But what you're left with are sort of snippets of images. They come into your mind, and that's what haunted me for years, thinking,
Of
why
course.
did I see only pieces of these things? Well, then you have to go and you put the pieces together, and that's a oh so much fun process. In fact, I will be honest with your audience and tell you it bites. But the good thing is, once you're done, it's like opening a wound and getting it cleaned out, and then it can heal.
Well, I appreciate everything that you have shared thus far, and I know that, well, it can be very difficult for anyone in your position to share because you are remembering and you are doing this a lot because you are involved with helping kids who have gone through this, and so it's brought up constantly. And I sincerely appreciate you sharing that story. But we do want to switch gears a bit because there is a positive side, a wonderful side to this story, and that is what you are doing now. So, my first question in that regard is based on 15 years of studies that had been done. A study was done in 2016, ECPAT, ECPAT,
Hmm.
USA, which clearly showed that boys are just as vulnerable to this as girls, and yet when they try to seek help, they are often met with indifference. Can you address that, please?
Yeah, I'm on the what's called the Survivor Voice Council at ECPAT, and I realized actually I got the date wrong. That initial study came out in 2013, but they looked at a number of smaller studies that were done and have shown that boys in the United States are 50% of the victims. In fact, boys are more likely to be used in child sexual abuse material in the U.S., which unfortunately the U.S. is the largest producer of that. They do, the people making it do live streams from all over the world, but it originated, set up here in the U.S. But yeah, based on the information they provide, the study is called "And Boys Too," and it's very clearly shown that males under the age of 18 are just as likely as females to be abused. So when people want to tell me that 99% of the buyers are men and 99% of the victims are women and girls, my answer is that's simply not correct in the United States. And child
Hmm.
trafficking, child abuse material is a $50 billion year industry.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just an estimate because nobody really knows for sure. But here in the U.S. alone, globally, it's estimated to be at about 140 billion. And so my challenge is to get people to read the study, update your information, and realize that boys need help too. The ECPAT study speaks for itself. They're talking about doing an update. The director there, Lori, is a friend of mine. She said, "You've inspired me. We need to update our study." So I may get involved with that too. But
Well, why is this important? Like, what should the audience know about this, and as far as why it's important?
Well, it's real simple if you want to look at numbers. I looked at the U.S. Census data from the last time it was taken, and it's my understanding there are 300,000 children in the United States under the age of 18. If you figure that 1 in 4 boys or 1 in 4 girls is going to be verbally, physically, emotionally, or sexually abused by the time they turn 18, that's out of 300,000 to 25% of that is the number of kids who are being hurt, and then
Wow.
half boys. So I think it comes out to about 35,000 boys or girls across the United States every day are subject to some kind of abuse. That ain't no small number. That's why it's important.
Right.
But
Okay.
when people want to tell me that, like I'm involved with several projects to get safe houses built for boys, we have 3 here in Colorado for girls, and a couple of them had to shut down because of COVID. I believe they'll reopen. They're doing amazing work, but I'm working with a group now trying to get one built for boys. There's blowback coming to that. People are saying, well, we still need beds for girls. And my answer is, we have empty beds here in Colorado, and we have girls who are being rescued that can be placed there. We have boys that are being rescued, and what happens to them is they get dumped into the juvenile justice system.
Oh no.
There's no place to put them. So don't tell me that we need more beds for girls
Hmm.
when you've got empty beds available and nothing for half the victims here. That's why it's important. People
No
have
kidding.
to say, and I understand the work that other organizations are doing, and I appreciate it, but I think it just, for me, is frustrating when people want to speak against my effort to promote
Hmm.
building safe houses for males because they think more needs to be done. Well, more needs to be done in all situations, but right now there's nothing for boys. Every state, I would bet, has safe houses for girls. I'm only aware of 2, I think, in Florida that exist for boys, and one being built in Texas, one here in Colorado, one is proposed in Arizona that I'm working with. So That's 5 total.
Awareness is crucial, if
Yeah,
I'm guessing. And I have a note here that you have spoken to over 3.5 million people worldwide. You've spoken, or they've read your book, your blog posts, your articles, etc. So the
right.
first thing is, I applaud you because you obviously have found your purpose, and you have taken, your victimhood per se, and turned it into one of victory. And you have taken and used, this incredible life that you had as a child and turned it around to help other people. And that's what life is all about. And I applaud you. I don't want to use the word impressed, but that's essentially what it is. So impressed by your efforts and what you are doing, will continue to do. And your heart, your empathy have to be in the right place
Yeah.
for for a lack of better term, because you have been there, you understand it, you are taking the message, you are doing something, not just by sharing your story, but also doing some hands-on work and changing what is going on. Is there anything that my audience that we can do to help in this regard?
I think if you work in organizations that are involved in helping kids in trafficking, if they use online imagery, for example, truthfully, 99% of the sites of organizations that do this kind of work only show girls. And so I would encourage people to say, why are we not, and can we do something for boys?
Good. Okay.
July 31st was World Anti-Human Trafficking Day, and I saw a number of sites, including organizations I worked with, that one of them posted a thing that said, one girl sold is one too many. And I said, why don't you just change
Mm,
and say one child? And the answer I got from them was, well, that's not our founder's vision. And I said,
wow.
well, maybe it's time to update the vision, because
No
if you're going
kidding.
to claim that you care about children being trafficked, why can't you just say child, because that includes the girls and the boys as well? But when you say one girl, you're allowing people to continue to believe the myth out there that only girls are trafficked and boys never are. And so we've got to help that. Another thing people can do is push for, when there's legislation going through, to make it gender neutral. We'll say that I'm a faith-based group and I take a biblical perspective there too. But make it gender neutral. A lot of the language coming out these days skews it towards saying resources need to be directed toward females because they bear a disproportionate share of trafficking situations, which again is simply not
Hmm.
true.
Hmm.
But it's like, so what that does is let people off the hook for doing anything to help boys. I mean, I don't care if it's 1 in 1,000. If you get a boy rescued out of trafficking, you need to help him. So I would say look at the legislation, make sure that it's broad enough to be inclusive for all children. I'm certainly available to come and speak too, and I will speak to organizations and share my story. I'll speak in churches and share my testimony, and I'll tell people this is my real situation. I'm a living, breathing person, and there are millions like me around the world. And here in the United States, I know a friend of mine was appointed by President Obama to his anti-human trafficking council, or he was reappointed by President Trump, and then I think he's since left that position at the end of the last administration. But he told me that he is well aware that 99% of the federal dollars that generate training information to speak about trafficking only speak about girls. And he said, you and I are, because he's a survivor as well, are survivors. So we get 1% of the message when we're half the victims. And I said, well, Rob, you're sitting in the Oval Office and push to change it. And when people sit there and say we need more survivors on this council, get more guys. There's people like me out
That's
there.
right. That's
Yeah.
right.
But so that's the kind of thing we need to do.
Oh my goodness, I'm so thankful that you did bring that up, and we definitely will, when we share your story, we're definitely going to ask people to do just that. Let's change it at the ground, right? We're going to take a very quick break. for just 30 seconds. And when we come back, I want to hear about not just your book, which is amazing, but also what else is coming as a result of that book and the ministry that you have in Colorado. So we'll be right back, and we can't wait to hear the rest of this story. Thank you.
Carol Graham would like to show you the path from misery to miraculous triumph in her fast-paced memoir, Battered Hope. She relates her determination to succeed as someone who experienced one horrendous nightmare after another: gang raped and left for dead, loss of a child, husband falsely imprisoned, and cancer. Nothing could break her tenacity or faith. No matter what you face, heartache, loss, suffering, or injustice, Carol will illustrate how she became a victor the same way you can. The secret is to never, ever give up hope. Order your copy at Amazon or batteredhope.blogspot.com.
Sean Wheller, for what you have shared already today regarding what is really going on in the child trafficking situation within our country and obviously worldwide. You have made us aware of things that I don't think the average person is aware of, and I especially appreciate what you said about this being not just a problem among girls and teenagers, but also among boys and teenagers, and what happens to them as they seem to get lost in the system. And so I really appreciate all of that you shared and bringing us to that awareness. Now, you have written a book which is called Wretch, Haunted by Shadows, Rescued by Jesus. I do want to say that I absolutely loved the book cover, where it shows a young boy with a hand placed over his mouth to keep him quiet. So if you could share a little bit about your book and also what's coming as a result of that, that would be awesome.
That actually started when I first met my first counselor. She talked about her work with abused children in the last church that I attended. And I went up to her afterwards, started talking to her, trying to be so nonchalant. And she just looked at me and said, "When were you abused?" And it made me tear up. It's like, "How'd you know?" And she said, "I can see it in your eyes."
Wow.
See, no one had ever said that before. So she said, "I've never worked with a man or a boy before, and but I would be happy to work with you, and I feel like it's a God-led thing." And so we talked about it, and we started meeting. And the first thing she was, "Well, so how do we start? Where do we, how do you get this story going?" And it's like, I don't talk very well without blubbering, and I've never shared this anyway. And she said, "Well, can you write?" And I said, "That I can do," because I do have a degree in journalism. So I started writing, and then I'd come to the session the next day and start reading the paragraphs I wrote without looking up. And she's doing her needlepoint while listening. And she says, "I think someday you're going to write a book." And I said, "No, I'm not." And she said, "And I think someday you're going to be sharing your testimony worldwide." And I said, "Again, no, I'm not. You just taught me about a God who whispered, made the sun. He can make this all go away and give me a normal life." And she said, "Yes, he could. But I think you're going to write a book and you're going to be speaking." And that was the end of that as far as she was concerned. So I just kept writing. And then that became the genesis of the book, which was published in 2016. It took me 5 years to write because I had to write about what it talks about is the challenges I first met when I tried to find help, the situations that I went through, the counseling processes that we did, and the follow-on. So that's all a part of it. Over the years, a couple of people contacted me about making short documentaries or something. I was never really interested because I thought I've seen a lot of these dusty shelves that no one ever looks at. If my story is going to be told, I want it told in a bigger way. Well, eventually, some filmmakers, Christian filmmakers, actually got a hold of the idea. They reached out to me. They're connected with PureFlix. One of the guys on the production team reached out and said, "We can help you turn this into a movie." And I said, "All right." It just seemed the right thing to do. And then they started talking like real movies, like,
the big screen.
Yes. And they're saying, "Well, we'll need about We could start with $1 million, but it'd be better if we had 10 million to start and 20 to finish. And I thought, who the heck has 30 million bucks? Well, I found there's people in the arts world who will fund this, who could write a check for the entire thing. And so the script process began. The other guy on the team took my book and wrote an outline, and he said, unfortunately, you're going to have to be the one to write these scenes because none of us can. And so I learned about script writing. I thought, well, I can get through this pretty easy because I speak about it all the time. Well, it took me 5 months to write, to write my portion of the script, which was basically filling in all the gaps. Now, it's on the 6th edition. We have a screenplay writer working with us in Hollywood, and I really can't share names at this point of who's involved with it, but potentially they're telling me it'll go through another 10, 12 revisions, and then once we get a producer and director hired, they'll work with it too. But they are convinced that it'll be on something on the case of on the level of The Case for Christ or War Room or one of those films. Pureflix may be our distributor. I'm hoping we can connect with them once we get the budget in place. And I laughed. I said, because I think seen my picture. It's like, hey, we could get Bruce Willis to play me. And the production team smiled and said, that's not beyond the realm of possibility with what we're doing. It's like, holy cramoly. So, that's the level of film we want to have produced. The working title of the film would be Haunted by Shadows. And the tagline for the movie right now is Finding Grace More Powerful Than Sin.
Wow. That's awesome.
And I'm just blown away. Yes. I'm to meet with some people in the next few months who are literally philanthropists that could get us the initial seed money. Once we had that, I found out there's a number of stages to go through, but eventually we hire a producer. The producer hires the director, and the director hires the talent. So they said, if we get the money we think we're going to get, we can probably get some pretty big names involved. So my dear sweet wife is like, so there's going to be me in a movie, and who's going to play me? And it's like, well, I don't know. But I said, we could dream big. We'll make it, Bruce Willis and Sandra Bullock playing.
There you go. There you go. But the important thing, and I know that you agree with me, is the message, and that's what's going to get out there. And that's so. What kind of date are you looking at? 2 years, 3 years, 1 year? Any idea?
My hope is a 2023 release in theaters, and it's going to be how quickly in the next 6 months we can get financing raised,
right,
all that sort of thing. And my senior pastor and friend, who's also in the movie, part of his sermon message the past couple of weeks, and I know he wasn't speaking at me, but just letting people know, he said, "You're not the star of your own movie. Jesus is the star." And I'm totally okay with it. Yes, it's my story, but like the first time I shared my testimony in 2014 at a small church in Louisiana, I got asked to speak. I promised God I would speak, and I went, I don't know how to tell this, Lord. I don't know how to tell people what people did to me and all that stuff. And the answer I got very clearly was, it's not about what people did to you or even your own stupid mistakes. It's about what I did for you, what I'm doing in you, and what I'm going to do through you.
Amen.
And so he really is the star of it. And yes, my name is in there. I debated whether or not I should use a fictitious name, and I decided not to, because I thought one of the things that'll come up on the screen when the movie starts is, this is a true story.
Right.
And yeah, we went and saw Respect about Aretha Franklin not long ago, which I love the movie.
Yes, I saw that too.
She was abused horrifically as well.
Yes.
But she was involved in the early production stages of that film and has passed away. And so a lot of films are made by people who are no longer here. I would rather it get made, and that helped me to grow the work I'm doing.
Yes, good point.
This is the real person.
Yes.
That's where we're at. Yeah, there's a whole lot of stages involved, and the production team said, just so you know, producers and directors don't like to be micromanaged. I said, that's fine with me. If we're paying somebody literally $300,000 to direct a film, which may be what they get, there's a reason for that. They know what they do. If they ask me what I think about something, I'll be happy to tell them, but I'm not going to micromanage because I hate, like any movie, it'll probably have things that I look at later and think, hey, we should have done this differently or that differently. But, ultimately, my story is God's glory.
That's a beautiful way to summarize. You have come basically from the pit of hell in sharing what happened to you as a young boy and then being rescued and now being able to share that not just your story, but what we can do and what the movie, hopefully, which will be out soon, can do to bring awareness, to bring comfort to those who possibly know someone who has gone through this. Or, I mean, there's so many different avenues, so many different types of people that will be touched. It's not just a story, but it's a message. And as you said, we're showing that God gets the glory and that God brought you through, and that message can be for anyone who might be going through something. It doesn't even have to be sexual abuse, but anything that they may be going through, that God cares and God loves them. Anything you would like to say in summary?
Yeah, I'll just simply say that that's absolutely right. I mean, I've had people come speak to me, and I've had over 400 guys contact me and say, because you got help, I can. I can do what you do, and that's I am a person comfortable in public speaking. You don't necessarily have to, but you don't have to live in this silence any longer. And I tell people, what happened is not the end of my story, and it doesn't have to be the end of yours either.
That's my tagline for my life. That's so funny on my website. This is not the end of your story.
I think too that it's basically offering hope, because
yes, exactly.
When people denied me hope, and yet I know now it had to be a God thing, there was still some hope inside, and it's like, you may think I'm just a thing or a bad kid,
right,
or whatever, but I don't think that's the whole truth. And so I found the truth, and that it offered me hope at the end of my life. I think if I have a tombstone, although I might be buried at sea because I was in the Navy, but other than my name and the dates, the only other word I want on it is redeemed.
That really touched me, and I know it is touching our audience. Thank you so much, Sean, for sharing on Never Ever Give Up Hope.
That's right, because we serve a God who can move mountains, and I've seen him move many mountains in my life. And I still do counseling, and sometimes people ask me, how much of this is left, and all I can tell them is I don't know, but I know what's left behind. And my work will continue with Starfish, in the prison ministry that I do now, in the speaking that I do now. It's just I have found my purpose. But
yes, that's right. Oh, Sean, I thank you again so much for sharing from your heart today. And if we can help any number of children in whatever way, that as you gave us some suggestions on how to do that, and also to become aware that this is indeed a problem, but every problem has a solution, and you have made that exquisitely clear. So again, thank you for being on Never Ever Give Up Hope, and that's what we always will do.
Amen to that.
Thank you for listening to Never Ever Give Up Hope, featuring Carol Graham. Did you know that most people succeed because they are determined to? Quitting was never an option. Carol loves your comments and will respond to each one. So please subscribe and review this podcast. A rating of 5 stars would be outstanding and appreciated. Remember, if you are still here, there is always hope.